Stand on any corner in Portage Park, on the northwest side of Chicago, and look in any direction. Look north, look south, look east, look west, the same house, brick, 1.5 stories, a porch 3 steps up from the sidewalk, wide front windows with a strip of colored glass across the top. A low roof pitched at exactly the same angle as the roof next door, and the roof next to that one, and the roof next to that one, for an entire mile. Between 1910 and 1940, developers built 80,000 of these houses in Chicago, not 80,000 houses, in the sense of 80,000 different designs, 80,000 copies of the same design, sometimes with a variation in the brickwork, sometimes with a different color of stained glass above the front window, but structurally, functionally, spatially, the same house, repeated block after block, mile after mile, across a wide crescent that runs 4 to 7 miles from downtown. Chicagoans call this crescent the bungalow belt, and by the end of the 1920s, 1 out of every 3 single-family houses in Chicago was a bungalow. The reason there are so many is one story. The reason the family in one bungalow was allowed to buy it and the family a mile away wasn't allowed to. The reason for that is a different story. Both stories happen inside the same brick walls, and by the end of this video, you will understand why every one of those 80,000 houses is still standing today, and why the neighborhoods they built look almost nothing like what the people who bought them expected. Before the bungalow, there was the tenement. Picture a block near the stockyards on Chicago's South Side in 1905. A 4-story wooden building with a fire escape hanging off the front. 20 families inside, 2 bathrooms in the hallway. No hot water. Coal soot on the windowsills. The sounds of 6 other families' arguments coming through the walls at any given hour of the day or night. Cooking done on a stove that also heats the room. Everyone in the family sleeping in one of 2 rooms, parents, children, sometimes an uncle who has just arrived from Poland or Ireland or Sicily. The tenement was the housing the industrial city had built for its workers. By 1900, Chicago was one of the fastest-growing cities in America. Between 1910 and 1930, more than 1 million people arrived. Some came from Europe, Poles, Italians, Germans, Slovaks, Irish, Bohemians. Some came from the American South in what would become known as the Great Migration. All of them, at first, moved into whatever housing was available, which meant tenements near the factories, behind stockyards, near steel mills, along the industrial river. The families in those tenements were not desperate people. Many of them were skilled workers with steady wages. What they wanted was to leave, not the city, but the tenement. What they wanted was a house with a yard, in a neighborhood with a school, on a street where the children could play in front of a window their family had chosen. This is the demand the bungalow was built to meet. And here's the argument this video is going to make. The bungalow's genius was not architectural, it was financial. It was the first house in Chicago that a factory worker with steady wages could actually afford to own. And the reason the same house appears on every block is that the mortgage system that paid for it was even more standardized than the house was. We are going to come back to that mortgage system at the halfway point. We are going to come back to it a second time near the end, because the mortgage is where the story goes from beautiful to complicated. Now stand in front of one of them. A typical Chicago bungalow sits on a lot that is 125 feet deep and 25 to 30 feet wide. That is the standard platted lot in most of the neighborhoods where they were built. The house itself is roughly 25 feet wide and 40 feet deep, giving each floor about 1,000 square feet. There is a full basement which increases the usable space by another 800, and there is a half-story attic with dormer windows, which most families finished as 2 more bedrooms once they had the money. The exterior is brick, face brick on the front, the good brick, the brick you show to the street, and Chicago common brick on the sides and back. Above the front windows there is often a band of decorative brickwork, or a limestone lintel, or a strip of stained glass in an arts and crafts pattern. The roof is low and hipped with wide overhanging eaves. There is a front porch, elevated 3 or 4 steps above the sidewalk, running the width of the front of the house. You walk up the porch steps. You enter through the offset front door, always on one side, never in the middle, into a small vestibule with a coat closet. From the vestibule, you step into the living room. The living room runs the full width of the house, with a large front window facing the street. It opens through a wide arched doorway, or through French doors, into the dining room. The dining room has a built-in buffet, dark-stained oak, glass-fronted with a mirror above it. This is where the family's best dishes go. Behind the dining room is the kitchen, small, efficient, with a pantry, a back door, and steps down to the basement and up to the attic. The bedrooms are along one side of the house, off a short central hallway. 2 bedrooms on the main floor, a single bathroom between them. That is it for private space on the ground floor. Now hold that layout in your head, because the layout is the key to everything. The public part of the house, living room, dining room, front porch, faces the street. The private part, bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen, is tucked to the side or the back. The working part, furnace, laundry, coal bin, storage, is in the basement. Every square foot of this house is doing a specific job. Nothing is decorative, nothing is wasted. Every wall separates a function from another function. This is not a house that grew out of a farmhouse or a mansion. This is a house that was engineered from the outside in, designed to fit a narrow lot, a specific budget, a specific family, and a specific dream. That dream has a name, and I want to name it before we go any further. In 1923, in a rented flat in a Polish neighborhood on the northwest side of Chicago, a husband and wife are sitting at a kitchen table. The husband works 10 hours a day at a factory. The wife takes in sewing. They have 3 children, all under 10, sleeping in the next room. Sitting across from them at the table is a man from the Polish Building and Loan Association. He has come to their home in the evening because that is when workers are home. He has brought with him a floor plan. He has brought with him a contract. He has brought with him, in his head, a schedule of payments. The floor plan is a Chicago bungalow, a model called the Armorel, or the Bellwood, or the Cedar Crest. Every builder had their own catalog. Every catalog had names. The bungalow they are looking at on paper costs $6,800 in 1923. That is roughly $110,000 today. Their combined annual income is around $1,600, about $26,000 today. The mortgage the man is offering them requires a $1,500 down payment. That is nearly their entire year of savings, everything they have not spent on rent, coal, food, and their children's clothes for the last 4 or 5 years. It requires monthly payments of $58 for 8 years, followed by a balloon payment of the remaining principal. They will sign it. Almost every family in this scene, in this decade, in this city, signed it. The mortgage system that financed the bungalow belt was not the mortgage system you know today. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage did not exist yet. What existed was a patchwork. Small immigrant-run building and loan associations, insurance companies, local banks, second mortgages layered on top of first mortgages, short terms, 5, 7, 8 years, with balloon payments at the end that had to be paid in full or refinanced. The system worked because everyone assumed that when the balloon came due, wages would still be rising, the house would still be worth more, and refinancing would be easy. The system worked, that is, from 1921 until the fall of 1929. We are going to come back to what happened after that. But before we do, I want to walk you into the layout the mortgage bought, because the layout tells you what the family thought they were buying, and what the layout could not tell them was who else the mortgage would keep out. The mother of the family we just met, call her the mother of the household because the block-level records rarely name her, is the one who spent the most time inside this house. She is also the one for whom this house was, in some ways, most transformative. Her kitchen is small, perhaps 10 feet by 12. Compared to the tenement stove she cooked on before, it is a revelation. She has a sink with running hot water, she has a gas stove, she has a pantry with shelves, she has her own back door that leads to her own back stairs. Her dining room, immediately adjacent, is where the family eats Sunday dinner. It is also where, once a year at Easter or Christmas, or a child's confirmation, she sets the table with the good dishes that live in the buffet. The buffet is where those dishes are stored the other 364 days of the year. The buffet is also where the family's photographs sit, where a wedding portrait leans against a saucer, where a child's baptismal certificate is folded behind a candy dish. The buffet is the emotional center of the house. The bedrooms are off the central hall. In this family, the parents share one. The 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, share the other. The attic is not yet finished. When the oldest boy turns 12 and modesty becomes a family concern, his father and uncle will spend 3 weekends putting up wallboard in the attic to make him a room of his own, his first room of his own. The basement holds the coal furnace. Every morning in winter, the father goes down before dawn and shovels coal into the firebox. When he leaves for work, he does it again. When he comes home, he does it again. The mother does it once during the day. The coal delivery comes twice a month, through a chute in the alley into a bin in the basement, 50 pounds of coal at a time. This is what the house was doing that the tenement could not do. It was separating the family from other families. It was giving the mother a kitchen that was hers alone. It was giving the children a room that was theirs alone. It was giving the father a basement he could work in on Saturdays. It was giving the family a porch they could sit on in the evening and greet and be greeted by only the neighbors they wanted to know. It was, in other words, giving them privacy. Privacy was the American middle class's most desired luxury in 1923, and privacy, for a factory worker and his wife, cost $6,800. Now walk south, 6 miles south, cross the industrial belt near the stockyards, keep going, and you arrive at Chatham. Chatham in 1928 is a bungalow neighborhood, same architecture, same layout, same brick, same porch, same buffet, same coal furnace. If you took the floor plan of a house in Portage Park and laid it on top of a floor plan of a house in Chatham, they would be identical. But the family who wants to buy a house in Chatham in 1928 cannot buy the house they want because that family is black, and every deed to every house on that block contains a sentence. The sentence is called a racially restrictive covenant. It looks something like this. No part of said premises shall be sold, given, conveyed, or leased to any Negro or Negroes. Sometimes the sentence names other groups, Asians, Jews, Southern Europeans, sometimes just the colored race, sometimes it is longer or shorter or dressed up in legal language. But the sentence is there, in the deed, in the paperwork, in the contract the building and loan man carried in his briefcase 25 years earlier when the block was first sold. By 1928, most of the bungalow belt was covered in these sentences, some by legal covenant, some by a gentleman's agreement between neighbors, some by an insurance company's rating map that made mortgages simply unavailable to black borrowers in specific census tracts. And after 1934, when the federal government created the Federal Housing Administration, those maps became official. The FHA rated neighborhoods on a color-coded system: green, blue, yellow, and red. Red neighborhoods received almost no insured mortgages. Almost every black-occupied or racially mixed neighborhood in Chicago was colored red. That is why they called it redlining. The Chicago bungalow was one of the great engines of American middle-class wealth building in the 20th century. Between the 1920s and the 1960s, families who bought a bungalow for $6,800 saw their houses appreciate to $30,000 to $50,000 to $80,000. The wealth built up in those brick walls funded college educations, second homes in Wisconsin, small businesses, retirements. The Black families who wanted to buy the same house on the same block were, legally, structurally, financially, prevented from doing so. They lived instead in older housing on the south side, in tenements, in kitchenette apartments, in subdivided graystones, and paid rent that made their landlords wealthy while building nothing for themselves. The wealth gap this created is the wealth gap that still exists today. I'm telling you this now in the middle of the video because the story of the Chicago bungalow cannot be told honestly without it, and because everything that happened next, the Depression, the war, Shelley versus Kramer, white flight, the transformation of the belt, is the story of that sentence in the deed, and what it took to erase it, and what happened after it was erased. In October of 1929, the stock market falls. By 1931, the family we met earlier has missed 3 mortgage payments. The husband has been laid off from the factory. The wife's sewing income has fallen by half. The Polish Building and Loan Association is calling. The balloon payment on their 8-year mortgage is due in 18 months, and they cannot pay it, and they cannot refinance it because no lender in Chicago in 1931 is refinancing anything. In 1932, the association forecloses on the house. Multiply this scene by 10,000. The Great Depression broke the bungalow belt's mortgage system. Building and loan associations failed. Banks failed. Families who had put every dollar they had into a down payment lost the house, the down payment, and the savings that would have let them start over. Some houses sat empty. Some were sold at auction to speculators. Some were rented back to the families who had once owned them on much harsher terms. The federal government responded. In 1933 and 1934, the New Deal restructured the American mortgage. The Federal Housing Administration was created. The Homeowners Loan Corporation refinanced foreclosed mortgages on new, longer terms. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, the mortgage most Americans know today, was invented essentially in this crisis, in this decade. The bungalow belt survived. Many families kept their houses on the new terms. Many families lost them and bought them back a few years later. By 1940, the belt was more or less intact, but the FHA's new mortgage came with those color-coded maps. The maps were drawn by local appraisers, working from local knowledge, and they encoded local prejudice into federal policy. A neighborhood with any black residents was rated red. A neighborhood adjacent to a red neighborhood was rated yellow, a stable. White neighborhood was rated green. For 30 years, from 1934 to 1964, the FHA insured mortgages almost exclusively in green and blue neighborhoods, which meant that federal money, the money that made the 30-year mortgage possible, the money that let millions of families buy houses on terms their grandparents could never have imagined, flowed almost exclusively to white families. The Chicago bungalow, which in the 1920s was financed by immigrant-run building and loan associations, was refinanced in the 1930s by the federal government. And the federal government made a choice, in those years, about who was allowed to build wealth in a brick house on a narrow lot in Chicago. That choice was written into the color of the map. The story we are telling is not the story of a house, it is the story of what a house is worth, and who is allowed to own one, and what happens to the family that does. In 1948, the Supreme Court decides Shelley versus Kramer. The court rules that racially restrictive covenants are not enforceable in court. A private agreement between white neighbors not to sell to black families is still legal to write, but no court can be used to enforce it. The sentence in the deed is now, effectively, a piece of paper. Between 1948 and 1970, the racial composition of large parts of the Chicago bungalow belt reverses. Chatham, on the south side, transitions from white to black. So do parts of South Shore, parts of Auburn Gresham, parts of Marquette Park. The transitions are not calm, blockbusting, real estate agents deliberately triggering panic sales among white owners by moving one black family onto a block and then buying every surrounding house at a discount is systematic in Chicago in the 1950s and 1960s. Many white families sell their bungalows for a fraction of what they would have gotten a year earlier. Many black families buy the same bungalow at inflated prices from the same real estate agent on contract terms that carry harsher penalties than a federal mortgage would. The bungalow becomes, in these decades, a symbol of both the promise and the punishment of American homeownership. Black families in Chatham finally own the brick house on the porch 3 steps above the sidewalk, but they own it under conditions white families never faced: higher prices, higher interest, higher insurance, higher taxes tied to redlined risk assessments. The wealth building the bungalow made possible for white families for 40 years is significantly harder to replicate for the black families who arrive next. But the houses themselves, the walls, the porches, the buffets, the low-hipped roofs, continue to hold families, multi-generational families, families that live in one bungalow for 50 years, families where the grandmother's photograph still sits on the buffet where the previous grandmother's photograph sat. Families that finish the attic for a teenage grandson the way the original family finished it for their teenage son in 1934. The house does not change. Who lives in it does. By 1990, the racial map of Chicago has been redrawn, but the architectural map has not. The bungalow belt is still there, every block, every porch, every stained glass window. Walk a block in Portage Park today, or Chatham, or Belmont Cragin, or Berwyn. You will find on almost every block the same houses you would have found in 1928. The bricks are older, the roofs have been reshingled 2 or 3 times, some porches have been enclosed as sunrooms, some windows have been replaced with vinyl. Some houses have grown a second story that the original architect never imagined. But the underlying form, the brick, the porch, the low roof, the offset front door, is still there. In 2001, the city of Chicago launched the Chicago Bungalow Initiative, a preservation program that offers grants and tax incentives for sympathetic rehabilitation. Historic districts were designated, guidelines were published. The bungalow, which for most of its life had been considered simply the modest house working people lived in, was suddenly considered architecture, worthy of preservation, part of Chicago's identity. The families who live in these houses now are as different from each other as the family in Portage Park in 1923 was different from the family in Chatham in 1928. Some are the great-grandchildren of the original Polish or Irish owners still on the same block. Some are black families whose parents moved to Chatham in the 1960s. Some are Mexican families in Belmont Cragin. Some are young couples buying their first house in a market where a bungalow now costs $350,000. And some of these families are still fighting over the same thing the family in 1923 was fighting over. The coal bin was replaced with a gas furnace, and then with a high-efficiency boiler, and then with a heat pump. The single bathroom was renovated and then split in 2. The buffet in the dining room was refinished and then removed to open up the kitchen, and then, in the most careful preservations, reinstalled 20 years later when the new owners realized how much they missed it. The house is small, the lot is narrow, the porch faces the street, the layout still separates the public from the private, the family from the visitor, the mother's kitchen from the father's basement. The bungalow is one of the last remaining pieces of American housing that was designed on the exact scale of a family. Not too large to be occupied, not too small to be lived in, not too rich to be for workers, not too poor to be aspirational, modest, brick, permanent, and impossibly numerous, 80,000 of them. Which is why, if you stand on any corner in Portage Park today and look in any direction, you will see still the same house, repeated for a mile. Drive west from the loop on Milwaukee Avenue. You pass through the parts of the city that filled up first, the West Town, the Wicker Park, the areas that have been gentrified now, the areas that used to be Polish. Keep going. The blocks widen, the buildings get shorter, the trees get older. Somewhere around Kedzie or Pulaski or maybe as far out as Central, the character of the street changes. And without being told that you have entered the belt, you will see the same house 80,000 times. You will see it painted, not painted, brick cleaned, brick repointed. You will see it with its porch enclosed and with its porch open. You will see it with the original stained glass and with vinyl replacements and with the stained glass carefully removed and stored by an owner who is waiting to reinstall it after they can afford the frames. You will see Polish flags on Independence Day. You will see Mexican flags. You will see Puerto Rican flags. You will see LGBT flags. You will see the American flag and the American flag with the 50 stars and the American flag with a POWMIA insignia. Every version of who has lived in these houses at every time is still displayed on the porches today. You will see the same buffet still standing in the dining room in a house on the 5300 block of Long Avenue in Portage Park that was carried up the front steps in 1923 by a family whose last name has been forgotten to the block-level record. That buffet holds the current family's photographs now, their Christmas ornaments, their grandmother's dishes. You will see, in other words, a house that was built to hold a family still holding one. 80,000 times, 4 to 7 miles from downtown, in a crescent that Chicagoans call the Bungalow Belt, and every one of them still is a story that no other city in America can tell.